Hello and welcome to the first live Ealing local history talk in 2022. My name is Dr. Jonathan Oates, Borough Archivist for the London Borough of Ealing, and this evening's talk is titled Extreme Weather in Ealing. It's focusing on two different aspects of extreme weather which have occurred in the second half of the 20th century. Now, I'm sure that everyone remembers the Great Storm of 1987. Even if you weren't living in Ealing, you probably remember it because so many trees were blown down. And of course, it's infamous because a weather forecaster made a prediction which turned out not to be entirely accurate. However, there have been other examples of extreme weather in Ealing, and this talk talks about both of these. Now, just to show the first picture. Now this slide has really not much to do with this talk at all, but it's just showing the devastation of falling trees following a storm in Ealing in about 1915. And this scene is, as I'm sure most of you can realise, is in Walpole Park. So we're on to the main item. Or the first. Get this moving. Okay. The Acton hurricane of 1954 is not well remembered, I would suggest. But on Wednesday, the 8th of December 1954, a hurricane began in the stormy sea of the English Channel and gathered speed over Portsmouth before reaching West London and finally finishing itself off in Hertfordshire. The Acton Gazette newspaper recorded the headline, "It was the Blitz without the bombers." It was estimated that in Acton 429 houses had been damaged, and the tornado's path had started in what's the south of the borough and moved in a northerly direction, more or less in a straight line. Most spectacular, perhaps, was the collapse of the 80-foot high chimney of the Royal Standard Laundry. Trees also fell, blocking East Acton Lane, and also part of a railway line near Gunnersbury. Fallen masonry blocked the roads. Some cars were crushed. Mrs. Harborne, a wages clerk, recalled that the noise was like that of 4 jet planes rushing down on top of us. Even, she said, some of the men were frightened. Now, the first property that was thought to have been damaged was 261 Acton Vale, and you can see a picture of 261 Acton Vale here. You can see the terrible damage it has done to the side of the house, exposing all the rooms on that side and causing a great amount of rubble to fall from the building onto the pavement and to the road. 261 Acton Vale was home to Mrs. Mudge, a shopkeeper, when the whole side of her house closest to the Uxbridge Road fell onto that road. It was just before 5 o'clock in the evening, just before the crowds were going home. Mrs. Mudge was white and shaken, saying, "It was the most terrible thing ever. I thought the whole lot was coming down on top of us, and I was terribly frightened." She, her son, and a lodger stayed with friends that night in Chiswick. Her neighbour was Mrs. Ella Hogarth at number 265, and she had to be rescued by a fireman as she was trapped in her attic when the roof and windows were blown in and the door was then jammed. She recalled having just put the kettle on just before the hurricane struck. "I was very frightened, but unhurt, so I called for help." Mrs. Walker of number 1 Mansell Road heard her cry out, and she called the police. The common experience in Acton at that time was that roofs were torn off houses, walls collapsed, which meant that windows were broken and shattered. The worst hit areas of Acton were those around Acton Green and Acton Vale. Properties in these streets, as well as in Rothschild Road, were damaged. Other affected streets were Bollow Lane, Antrobus Road, Ivy Grove and Kingswood Grove, not to mention Temple Road and Montgomery Road. Thousands of people could only watch as the whirlwind spread havoc throughout Acton and damaged their homes. Mrs. Elms worked in a shop on the Vale, and she recalled, "I was serving in the shop when there was that terrible noise of thunder and some lightning. Then followed a terrific crash. We rushed outside and heard someone calling for help inside a lorry. 2 men had been trapped inside the lorry by a fallen tree, and though the emergency services were called, rescue was carried out by 2 men from a nearby RAF recruiting centre." Now, I've already mentioned there's great damage to the Royal Standard Laundry. It was said, and there's quite a few pictures of this building. It seems that the photographers on that day wanted to photograph nothing but this building. So many photographs of this building, all different angles, and hardly any of any other buildings, apart from the 261 Acton Vale. So I'm afraid you will be seeing a lot of the Royal Standard Laundry as it was damaged. Apparently, rebuilding the brick wall will cost £1,000, and it completely wrecked the whole house and damaged a large part of our engineering and generating room. Another factory that was damaged was Gilder's lead factory. Fortunately, no one was killed, but some people were injured and went to Acton Hospital on Gunnersbury Lane, which was inundated with casualties. No doctor available on that evening, so as you can imagine, the queues for his services were very lengthy. 79-year-old Ernest Cook of 5 Kent Road needed 3 stitches to his face caused by flying glass. 2 injured busmen also went to hospital. A sister declared, "We have had our hands full, so we cannot move. Only one doctor to deal with the patients." But fortunately, the whirlwind struck at a time when the ambulance and fire crews were changing shifts. This meant that there was twice the usual manpower available to deal with the emergency, as both teams, those about to finish their shift and those about to start their shift, were able to help out. Fortunately also, radio communications were not disrupted, and this was very helpful. The fire service said, "I am once again pleased to report on this enthusiasm and devotion to duty displayed by members of both the fire and ambulance services. Their enthusiasm made it difficult to withdraw crews who were still working long after the normal tour of duty. However, resources had been drained, and from 4:40 p.m. on the 8th of December, hours later, there were many calls on the fire services, with a peak between 5 and 6 just after the whirlwind was raging. Fire service from other boroughs in Middlesex also came along to help out during the crisis. The police were out in force as well on the streets that evening, checking which houses were dangerous because of the damage to roofs and walls. The night watchman was searched for under the rubble, but after 2 hours, the would-be rescuers then learned he had never been there in the first place. Several residents' experiences were recorded in the local press. The elderly Mrs. Putnam said, "It really was terrible. I was sitting in my chair in the corner when the walls shook and the glass broke all over the room, rushing down the walls and making all my furniture wet. But I wasn't really frightened." Bill Pearson of 269 The Vale said, "I was in an upstairs room when it began to shiver and shake. The roof was torn off. I have had 30 years in the army and have served in 2 world wars, but tonight was the first time I was really frightened." Then there was a number of near misses. An elderly resident of Rothschild Road recalled that on the evening of the storm he heard a knock on his door. Going downstairs, he found a young couple who were wanting shelter from the storm. He let them in and then heard a crash upstairs and found that the room he'd just been in had had its roof blown off. Girls working in the washroom of the Royal Standard Laundry threw themselves on the floor as they heard the roar and felt the building shake. When the chimney crashed, it hit the boiler room where 4 men were at work, but fortunately they were unscathed. The living room of the Central Middlesex Hospital was destroyed. 4 nurses who had just been having their tea break there had just left the room. Alfred Austin of 16 Birkbeck Grove had been resting downstairs when a chimney stack crashed through his roof. One man recalled what happened to Mrs. Allison of Bridgman Road. She was walking in Church Path when she was caught by the wind and swung round. She hung onto a galvanised iron fence and was hit by lightning. She was not fatally injured, I'm glad to say. After the storm, it was left to count the cost. As you can see, the laundry was extremely damaged. A spokesman from the laundry, he noted that the damage was to the extent of between £5,000 and £6,000 and said that they will be making an insurance claim on the grounds that the building had been hit by lightning. A director claimed, "We believe that it was lightning because the stoker was outside getting some coal and he saw a lightning flash." The AA Electrical Company on Rothschild Road claimed successfully on their insurance for a company car destroyed, but they could not claim for damage to their factory. And this was because they had a comprehensive insurance company on the policy on the car, but only for fire on the factory, and so therefore were not covered. Wilkinson's shelter was also blown down. Next day, 9th of December, scaffolding could be seen on many buildings erected around roofs, which began to be mended. Rubble was being cleared away and walls were being shored up. There was a heavy frost, and this did not help. It took 50 men to remove the railway line. As you can see, the railway line at Gunnersbury was quite covered with rubble and debris. And initially, when this photograph was first brought like 20 years ago and thereabouts, it was thought that this was World War II damage being repaired, but we now know, of course, it was some years after World War II. So all the trees and other damage on the railway line had to be moved away, and as one man was using a power-driven saw, and this, of course, helped things considerably. There was other damage, of course. The shelter and playground at Southfields Recreation Ground destroyed. Trees in Acton Park had blown down, were cut up and removed. Fencing in East Acton Lane was also destroyed, and a tree fell from Acton Park to also cross the railway line elsewhere from this scene as well. Acton Council announced it would make loans to help the owners of mortgaged properties in the borough, with a spokesman stating, "It is the intention of the council to exercise this power to the fullest extent in this emergency." Applications had to be made to the finance department of Acton Town Hall, and Acton's mayor went round to see some of the people whose properties had been damaged. However, one householder stated that his wife had been to the town hall on the day after the whirlwind, but was told that the tarpaulins which the council had for emergencies were only for council properties only, not for mortgagees. And the householder wrote to the local newspaper, "Speaking for myself, I would have preferred an ounce of practical help to a ton of sympathy, which, however well meant, does not keep out the rain when you have no roof." He also said he had no help from his regimental association nor from the insurance company, as his property was only insured for damage from thunder and lightning, but not for damage caused by hurricanes. Human nature, I'm afraid, showed a less than wonderful side in the crisis, because Martin Bell and Keith Harrison, both from Ealing, were found to have stolen 3 lead ingots from the damaged Girdler factory. Sentencing them to 3 months in prison each, the magistrate said, "This was a particularly mean theft. The fact that the factory was blown down by the whirlwind last week and the lead was exposed makes it a more serious offence." The laundry that was damaged, and we've seen lots of photos of, was put out of operation for a whole week, and employees were directed to other premises belonging to the same company in the locality. Standard Laundry eventually opened on the 19th of December, so about 11 days after the hurricane. Henry St. John was a middle-aged civil servant who lived in lodgings in Acacia Road of Acton in the 1950s, and his diary, which is held in the archives, includes a number of references to the aftermath of the hurricane. On Thursday the 9th of December he wrote, "Rain at first, clearing with bitter wind. At the northwest corner of Vale Grove, the side wall of a house had been torn away, and there was severe damage to the opposite corner, which had not long ago been destroyed by a bomb." A loudspeaker announcement at Hammersmith Station was that Gunnersbury Station was closed, although trains were running to Richmond. These incidents were both sequels to a small tornado which hit the district at 5 p.m. yesterday. On the next day he wrote, "From the train this morning I saw a glimpse of a broken off stack of a factory at the Royal Standard Laundry in Bollow Lane. The rest crashed through the roof of the boiler house during Wednesday's," of course it should have been Thursday's, "tornado," and of course it should have been hurricane. His final relevant entry was on the 19th of December, a Sunday. "In Kingswood Road and Rothschild Road, South Acton, I saw more damage to houses caused by the tornado on the 8th of December. 2 of the hit properties had been given tarpaulins over roofs and side walls. Ladders against houses indicated that roofs were under repair, slates under windows had suffered extremely, and rickety timber fences were blown down. It was like a minor blast from a high explosive bomb." Let's get to the next picture, which shows another repairman at work. Slide 10. Another local diarist, on the one who lives in Southall rather than Acton, was Ted Crouchman, who was then a young man. His diaries are also at Ealing Archives, and he lived in Dormer's Wells in Southall and recorded on the 8th of December, the day of a hurricane, weather, everything. Rain, wind, thunder, lightning, hailstones, noise on factory roof. Several houses were blown down in Acton. In the following year, trees in Creswick Road and Acton Park were found to be so badly damaged that they had to be cut down and burnt. One local man wondered if he could take sticks from these trees and offer them to elderly householders for use as firewood, but the council told him he would need to make an official application to do so, and to the borough engineer, who and obviously the writer of this letter thought this was a rather officious attitude. We'll now turn to, I'm sure, a more well-known incident, the October storms of 1987. Far better known because, of course, they're in living memory for us, and the Great Storm of 1987 took place on the night of the 15th to the 16th of October 1987, a Thursday/Friday. It affected France as well as England. Apparently it is the worst storm to have taken place since, in England anyway, since 1703, and nationally a total of 18 people were killed. It was fortunate it happened during the night time, not the daytime, and the main impact was on the south of England rather than the north. The wind speed was 100 miles an hour. In Ealing, about 5,500 trees were blown down. Half of these were from the borough's parks and other open spaces. More were damaged, with another 2,000 large trees being destroyed outright. The Brentham estate was especially badly hit. It lost 48 trees from its streets. Apparently Ealing lost more trees than Essex. Area. Ealing residents contacted the emergency services due to the fallen trees. Most people, of course, had slept through the storm, and when they got out of bed in the morning and opened their curtains, and they realised what happened. Trees had also failed to destroy the far greater number of cars which had existed in 1987 compared to 1954. The council switchboard was jammed with calls from 3 o'clock in the morning, and off-duty council staff were called in to help out. At 4 o'clock, police went round knocking up householders to tell them to remove their cars because they could be in danger of being hit by falling. In fact, 2 police officers had a near miss when they'd driven over to Gunnersbury and got out of their patrol car. When they returned to the car, they discovered that trees had fallen all around the car, fortunately not on it. and the fire service was swamped with calls. Margaret Kirk, an official there, said, "We asked people not to call unless it was an emergency, but they still rang to call about fallen trees, which had not hurt anybody." Although Henry St. John had died in 1979, we lost one diarist. Ted Crouchman was still alive, still writing his diary, and he recorded on this day, "Terrible windstorm all over southeast England. Power cut from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Woke up as early as 4 o'clock. Used torchlight. Got my mother up. TV transmission mostly cancelled. M4 park closed." On the next day he wrote, "Photos, fallen trees." But on the next, there was a nice sunny day with a gentle breeze, mild. Another first-hand account of an Ealing resident is as follows. "I remember the 87 storm very well. My son was 5 weeks old and slept like a baby throughout that night. I remember being woken in the middle of the night by the noise of the wind. I went down to the kitchen in my pyjamas, turned the patio light on the back, and was greeted by a scene I never forget. The trees at the bottom of the garden were swirling up like clothes in a washing line in a gale. Our roof shed had gone. Never did find out where it ended up. And in the morning, my car was blocked into Beaconsfield Road by a fallen tree at either end. I remember the sheer noise of the wind, a kind of howling." Now, most of the photographs in our collection seem to be taken from North Ealing, from Brentham Estate, not always exactly how the narrative of the slide is. So I'll just show slides every now and again, even though I might not necessarily be talking about Woodfield Road, Pitsanger Park, or all the other scenes that you will see in the near future. On Conway Crescent in Perryvale, trees fell across the road, tearing open a water main and an electricity main, and pulling down telephone wires. Miss Marion Clevdo recalled, "We were all looking out when it came down very slowly. It was frightening to watch because we did not know where it would go. Some people in houses by falling trees and had to be rescued. An elderly lady needed to call the fire brigade to remove a tree, stopping her leaving her back door, as that was the only route to the toilet, an outside toilet, still in 1987, it's pretty amazing. One of the worst hit streets was Bernard Avenue, with trees blocking the road. This interrupted a funeral procession on the next day, because of course the hearse could not pass, so the undertaker's men had to carry the coffin over the tree instead. All Ealing parks were closed over the weekend. It was not only trees which were affected, but many buildings too. Fortunately, although a tree had fallen on the Grade 1 listed bridge at Walpole Park, designed by Sir John Soane, it had not destroyed it. And as the park curator said, this is Emmeline Leary, said it was a narrow escape. There's also damage to Brentford Library and to the nearby War Memorial. It was estimated in Ealing that 500 council houses had been damaged. And there was one man who was made homeless because the boat he was living on sank. The steeple of Perryvale Free Church fell down on Medway Avenue. The roof of Stephen Benbow's chicken hut on the allotments off Green Lane in Hanwell blew off, and so he spent the morning rounding up his birds. Initially, it was thought that the cost would be £250,000, but possibly more. And indeed it was, because the final bill was thought to be in the region of £2.5 million, of which the government would pay at least half. There were many stories about how people coped on this occasion. Show another picture. Postman Neville Bulzan was given a crash helmet by a woman in Charrington Road, Hanwell, as he scrambled over fallen trees for the morning's mail. Despite problems on Conway Crescent, the milkman still delivered the milk. There was a lucky escape for Paulo Alvo and his family on Fors Avenue. He took his 1-year-old daughter from the front room just before a tree crashed into it. A man who had a dry cleaning business on Argyle Road in West Ealing said that at about 7 o'clock in the morning he was trying to stop passers-by from coming too close to his business because the chimney on his business had fallen down and there were other debris on the roof which he thought might be blown down or fall off the roof and hit passers at any moment. And a fireman who came along to help clear it up said, A lot of the chimney crashed down before we arrived. If it had hit anybody, it would have probably killed them. In Norfolk, there was scaffolding around a house on Byron Way, which had come down, and Anita Baker, who lived nearby, in the same street, called the police when she saw it swinging dangerously. There were metal bars, meanwhile, had fallen 100 feet down and had damaged 4 cars below. Much of the work of a clear-up was actually the work of householders. Some were unable to get to work, and so in their enforced leave, they were able to work on the immediate locality. This was especially the case when there were fallen trees and men had chainsaws. Some people worked alongside council employees. A senior council employee remarked, a lot of people cleared up their own property and the road if access was restricted. Albert Avery, aged 81, helped to sweep up the smaller debris from Norwood Green Road where he lived and said, in all my 81 years, I've never seen anything like it. Fortunately, as in 1954, there was no loss of life locally and little injury to anybody. Ealing Hospital had a quiet night, just as Acton Hospital hadn't in 1954. But council tree expert David Frost said, because it was at night, there was no serious incidents, but if it had been during the day, there would have been fatalities. However, the emergency generator at Queen Charlotte's Hospital broke down, and so all the machinery and lights on the night in question went off. The doctors and nurses had to work by torchlight and apparently even candlelight for 2.5 hours. Ealing Council leader Len Turner said, "This is the worst storm in living memory, and so far the government's responsibility has been the worst in living memory." The council had council houses and trees as their main priorities to deal with. Ealing Council was rather more proactive in this instance than Acton's had been in 1954. Council staff were out in force on the streets on the next day and also working in cemeteries and parks after the storm. And most of the immediate work that had to be done was completed in the next 3 days, in which 650 trees had to be removed, but more work remained to be done. The council staff also had to manage the public, with Preston stating, "We have had to read the Riot Act to a few people. Mostly, though, everybody has been very sensible." One man who was not, was someone who removed bollards in order to park his car under a damaged tree. Preston recalled, "So we had to have a few strong words with him." The council's emergency centre was Greenford Depot, which was quite near to the Catholic school in Greenford, and it provided some emergency help there as well. Preston said that people had to watch out for the cowboys. If anyone charges more than £50 in estimate for taking away debris, then do get a second quotation. However, there was, of course, a long queue for anyone wanting to have work done on private property. But some people thought that the storm had positive outcomes. Children played happily among the fallen trees and debris, especially in church fields in Hanwell and also in Blenheim Crescent in Acton. Mr. Connell of Castlebar Road was pleased too, not because he wanted to play in fallen trees, I add, but because, he said, the hurricane that destroyed so much of the borough's beautiful trees did one small service for Ealing. Hundreds of estate agents and house agents' signs that defiled the appearance of residential streets disappeared in the storm. The council also came in for criticism as well as praise. One resident almost blamed the damage to cars by falling trees on the council, because they said that when the trees were replanted, the council should consider carefully when they're replanting trees because in the past the council just planted them anyway and without regard for possible damage to shops and houses. He admitted that car owners could claim insurance but would lose obviously no claims bonus. Jean Humphreys of Manor Court Road in Hanwell praised the council's efforts. She said the speed and efficiency which Ealing Council and its workforce reacted to the havoc caused by a recent hurricane was impressive. She said that this proved that the value of the council having control of a direct labour force and of local services, and she criticised the government for being very slow in responding. She said that the man who had written the previous letter about the council being basically sort of liable for having planted trees which then fell over and damaged people's cars, she said that many of the trees that had fallen had actually been there for a very long time, and their falling down in the storm was not at all the fault of the council, and neither should the council be responsible for compensating car owners who had had their vehicles damaged. The aftermath of the storm, as said, it was a huge exercise, and one of the main parts of it was to replant trees. John Nettles, who was a well-known star of a popular TV detective series, Bergerac, had been filming, somewhat bizarrely you might think since it's set in the Channel Islands, he was actually filming a scene in Brent Park a few weeks after the storm, and he planted a new tree there. The Evening Gazette newspaper had a scheme where a free tree planted if they brought in a large number of tokens which appeared in the local newspaper. Apparently if you produced 2,000 tokens, the newspaper would plant a tree for you. And these were called target bonds, and the idea was that people collected them and then obviously brought them into the newspaper. Meanwhile, the editor, Dennis Green, planted a new lime tree to replace one that had gone from Ealing Green after 70 years. And there's also a council-sponsored tree planting scheme where if residents contributed £20 per tree, they could plant a tree for them. It was suggested that the fallen trees could be sold as timber to help to recoup all the costs of all this. But this idea did not take off because traders are only interested in high-quality timber because of the glut of wood. It needs a lot of labour to cut the wood to the right size and sort it out, and we could just not make a profit. Wood was cut up and dumped at a site in Greenford and places outside the borough. Some students from the Royal College of Art used some of the wood from the destroyed trees to make wood carvings and sculptures. In total, 5,400 trees had been replanted between October 1987 and April 1989. Grenfell residents in particular contributed money. Apparently they gave £1,200 towards this exercise. On the 13th of February 1988, the corner of Fowler's Walk and Brentham Way, the mayor ceremonially planted a new oak tree and even erected a plaque, watched by 30 to 40 residents. So just a few more pictures showing the damage in Brentham and elsewhere, blocking roads, damaging cars, falling on houses in Winscombe Crescent, and another example of storm damage on the Brentham estate, and more damage crossing the road at Woodfield Road. In 1954, an elderly Actonian recalled the Great Acton Flood of 1890 as an early natural disaster to strike the locality, but no one in 1987 made any reference to the 1954 hurricane, which was, of course, then only 33 years before. It was nearer to the storm than we are to the storm now. The Great Storm 1987, of course, was 35 years ago. People remember it now, but in 1987, nobody remembered the Acton storm as far as we know. Certainly the council's leader at 1987, Len Turner, seemed to be ignorant of local history, as an event 33 years ago, certainly I would say would count as being within living memory, but he seemed to think not. Anyway, I'd also say that in conclusion that there's certain similarities between two natural disasters. Both of them occurred towards the end of the week. In Acton, it was in Wednesday, and in 1987 was Friday. They also both happened towards the end of the year. The Acton hurricane in December and the Great Storm in October. Both of them were caused by extreme blasts of wind. The damage to trees and property was the worst damage which occurred locally. In Acton in 1954, it was relatively localised, damaging property within a north-south corridor, but it was far more widespread in 1987. as well as, of course, being a national issue as well as a local issue. Tree damage was more prolific in 1987, and given the greater level of car ownership, more cars were damaged in 1987 compared to 1954. Fortunately, however, there was no loss of human life in either district in either 54 or 87. Although, of course, there could well have been, given the number of lucky escapes people had, and especially, I think, in 1954. And there were relatively few injuries in 54 and hardly any in 1987. I think this was because the hurricane struck in the early hours of the morning of 1987, when most people are obviously not going to be out and about, whereas in 1954 there were people around in the streets and just either leaving work or still being at work in 54. Council in both occasions made an effort to deal with the consequences. I would argue probably more so in 1987 than in 1954. These examples of extreme weather are mercifully rare, but they do show what damage nature is capable of with little or no warning, as these two incidents show in Acton and in Ealing. Thank you. And any comments and suggestions or further questions, I'm happy to try and deal with. I don't pretend to be a meteorological historian by any means, but if anyone's got any comments, then go ahead. Thank you.